Earlier this week, I went down to Silverstone. I got to see some legendary cars, went to see some of the factories of the top teams on the grid today, and got a great view of one of the greatest Formula 1 tracks of all time. We'll be covering all that and more in this video. Welcome to the RCB Adventures in Silverstone. We start our journey at the Silverstone Museum, where we're welcomed by one of Lewis Hamilton's cars dangling from the ceiling. And we also get a brief view of the track before walking into the museum itself. One of the first cars we see is this, a replica of the ERA E-Type from 1939. A car that only ever raced once before the outbreak of the Second World War, and was part of the very first F1 race weekend at Silverstone. Now, as this was a replica, we are allowed to sit in it, which was pretty fun. And as you can see as I'm sat in it, I haven't got a helmet on, and I'm not wearing a seatbelt, which is the exact same as the driver would have done in 1939. And after having a quick sit down, the only thing left to do is have a very graceful exit. And in the corner of the museum is one of the most important pieces of F1 history ever. The Ford Cosworth DFV, which stands for double four valve. This engine was first used in 1967 and was developed as a cheap alternative engine for the teams, meaning that teams such as Williams, who were on a tighter budget, would afford to be able to put an engine in the car to compete with the bigger teams such as Ferrari. This engine would propel teams such as Lotus, McLaren, Matra and Tyrrell to wins, and then drivers like Graham Hill, Jackie Stewart, Jochen Rindt, Emerson Fittipaldi, James Hunt, Mario Andretti, Alan Jones, Nelson Piquet and Keke Rosberg to become world champions. In 1969 and 1973, every race was won by a Ford DFV engine. And during its time in production between 1967 and 1985, it would win a total of 155 from 262 races. Alongside its great use in Formula 1, it would also power 10 Indy 500 winners, 6 Formula 3000 champions, and 2 Le Mans 24-hour winners. At the time, the team would just have to pay £27,000 towards Ford to be able to use this, and it made them instantly competitive. It's a very easy argument to make that this is the greatest engine ever made and a massively integral part of Formula 1 history. The wheel nut was loose, the wheel would have fallen off near.
I don't think it was me.
Go again, ready?
Right, you ready?
There you go, 3.7. That's alright there.
That's good.
That's good. This is the Tyrrell 003, the car that would see Jackie Stewart become world champion in 1971. Powered by the Ford Cosworth DFV, this car would go on to win 6 races in 1971 and also carry on into 1972, where it would win an additional 2 more races. It saw Jackie Stewart win the World Championship by nearly double the points of Ronnie Peterson, who was in 2nd place. In total, it was entered into 16 races, winning half of them. And now we reach the part of the museum that I call Adrian Newey Corner, as we see 3 cars designed by possibly the greatest Formula 1 car designer of all time, Adrian Newey. Firstly, it is the 2000 McLaren that was driven by David Coulthard when he won at Silverstone. Then right next to it is the Red Bull of 2014, driven by Daniel Ricciardo, the year he got his first ever victory and stood at the podium at Silverstone. And finally, one of the greatest Formula 1 cars of all time, the 1992 Williams, driven by the legendary Nigel Mansell. In 1992, this car saw Nigel Mansell win 8 races, including the first 5 in a row. Of the 16 races that year, Nigel Mansell would DNF 4 of them. For the rest, he never finished lower than 2nd. This was the greatest car Adrian Newey ever designed in terms of numbers of wins in a season, up until last year. The one here in the museum is the same chassis as the one that won the Grand Prix at Silverstone that year. But the chassis that won the title in Hungary of that year is now owned by one Sebastian Vettel. The mix of brilliant driving from Nigel Mansell, amazing aerodynamics from Adrian Newey, and the introduction of active suspension made this car one of the greatest ever. And the final car I want to speak about from the museum today is this one, the Brawn 001. The incredible car that took my childhood favourite Jenson Button to become the 2009 Formula 1 World Champion. Brawn are a team with such an incredible story behind them that they're actually making a movie about it, and at some point I probably will make a video going into more detail. A team that were Honda in 2008 until Honda pulled out. Ross Brawn would buy the team for £1. The team went from back of the grid to world champions in one season. In one of the most unbelievable stories of all time, on their debut race they locked out the front row and would go on to win 1-2. Jenson Button won 6 of the first 7 races and of course would go on to become world champion. Brawn would also win the Constructors' Championship, meaning they're the only team ever to have an 100% record when it comes to Constructors' Championships. As for the 2010 season, Brawn would sell and become a team known as Mercedes. And I think they did well in the end as well. I can't quite remember that point. The car in total would achieve 8 wins, 15 podiums, 5 pole positions, and of course the Drivers' and Constructors' World Championship. And that was all for our time at the museum. On our way back, we stopped by this little hotel because they had a lovely little cafe there that had quite a nice view. But before heading home, we decided there were some more places we wanted to see, including the new Aston Martin factory, which is hidden behind a massive fence. But from one point you can see they have some flags, which is nice. Then we drove about half an hour down the road to find Haas, and in complete opposite style to Aston Martin, whilst I was outside the Haas factory, a security guard came out and invited me in. We got to see one of their cars, as well as some overalls, gloves, pit equipment. Very cool stuff. Then about a 20-minute drive from Haas, you will find Lauder Drive, home to a lovely bush, but also the Mercedes F1 factory. Unfortunately, no one invited us in here, but it may be because they just weren't a big fan of my t-shirt. Then, the next day, just before heading off home, there was still one place I really wanted to visit.
Vibration.